The sickening, sharp crack of a slap against my cheek didn't merely echo through the towering, vaulted ceilings of the Winter Haven Manor. It permanently shattered the last fragile remnant of my patience and blind loyalty. I am Claire, 42 years old, a woman who routinely manages billion-dollar corporate acquisitions before my morning coffee. Yet, I had never experienced such profound humiliation until that bitterly cold Christmas Eve, exactly 5 days ago. The grand ballroom, draped in sweeping garlands of fresh eucalyptus and shimmering silver lights for our annual holiday gathering, instantly fell into a suffocating vacuum. Over 75 elite guests, wealthy socialites who prided themselves on flawless decorum, were now staring open-mouthed. The soft string quartet playing in the background seemed to mock the sheer violence that had just erupted. It was supposed to be a joyous family dinner, a time to celebrate our successes. I was navigating the crowded marble floor, balancing a silver tray holding a bottle of vintage 1945 Pinot Noir, a bottle worth more than most people's annual salary. Suddenly, a tipsy tech investor stumbled backward, driving his elbow hard into my shoulder. The laws of physics took over, and the dark, blood-red liquid splashed violently across the pristine, snow-white silk gown my younger sister Chloe was wearing. She had spent a fortune just to outshine every other woman in the room, treating the dress as a monument to her own vanity. While I struggled to regain my balance on the slippery, polished floor, Chloe didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. Her hand flew across my face with enough vicious force to leave a burning crimson imprint on my skin, perfectly matching the stain on her ruined dress. She glared at me with pure, unadulterated venom. Her eyes were wide and manic while the entire room watched in absolute silence. Then the screaming started. Her voice cracked with unhinged rage as she shrieked right in front of everyone. "You clumsy, pathetic idiot! Watch where you're going! Are you completely blind?" My mother, Susan, rushed forward instantly. But she didn't look at me. She didn't check if the heavy crystal glass had cut my hands or if her eldest daughter was injured by the sudden physical assault. Instead, she fell to her knees to frantically dab at the hem of Chloe's dress with a silk napkin. She grabbed my arm roughly, her manicured acrylic nails digging deep into my skin, shoving me away from her precious, spoiled youngest daughter. "Apologize to your sister or get out of here right now. You've ruined everything," she hissed, her voice dripping with absolute disdain. I looked toward my father, Richard, desperately searching for some shred of defense, a flicker of the gentle dad who used to read me bedtime stories by the fireplace. But Richard simply walked over to the heavy, custom-forged iron front door and held it wide open. His expression was colder than the brutal blizzard raging outside. It was a look that explicitly told me I was no longer a daughter. I was a liability. He didn't utter a single word, but the message was deafeningly clear. I stepped out into the biting winter night, the howling wind instantly turning the hot tears I stubbornly refused to shed into ice. I didn't say another word because I knew, deep in my bones, that this was the final, irreparable fracture. I gripped the heated leather steering wheel of my SUV until my knuckles strained stark white against my skin, slicing through the blinding, impenetrable curtain of the Colorado snowstorm. The winding, treacherous mountain roads leading away from the estate were notoriously lethal at night, buried under fresh, heavy powder. Yet, the physical danger lurking beyond my windshield was absolutely nothing compared to the cold, dangerous clarity rapidly crystallizing in my mind. The stinging, hot sensation on my cheek was already fading into a dull, rhythmic throb, but the deep, burning humiliation I had just endured at what was supposed to be a joyous family dinner was quickly being replaced by a calculation far sharper than any grief I had ever harbored. I navigated the perilous hairpin curves leading down toward my downtown penthouse, deliberately letting the heavy, insulated silence of the car wash away the chaotic, vibrant noise of the gathering I had just left behind. It was truly ironic, almost laughable in a morbid sense, how completely and conveniently my family had forgotten exactly who had rescued them from total financial ruin and living on the streets a decade ago. That was the year the commercial real estate market imploded, taking my father's legacy development firm down into the ashes with it. I remembered vividly, as if it were yesterday, how Richard had sat slumped at my modest kitchen table, a broken, weeping man with his head buried in his hands, begging me to purchase Winter Haven Manor so his wealthy, judgmental friends at the country club would never discover he was entirely bankrupt. I was the one who quietly, without a single boast, bought the sprawling property to maintain the flawless illusion of their social standing. While I ground through grueling 6-hour workdays, surviving on lukewarm coffee and sheer willpower, Chloe was busy squandering money she had never earned on lavish spiritual retreats to Tuscany that she could never afford. I had even foolishly agreed to fully fund her high-end wellness spa chain because Susan relentlessly insisted that her precious golden child just needed a little financial push to finally stand on her own 2 feet. They genuinely seemed to believe that my generosity was an infinite, self-replenishing resource, a natural spring they could exploit forever, treating me like a glorified ATM without ever showing a single shred of gratitude or basic human respect in return. The elevator ride ascending to my penthouse floor felt agonizingly slow, as if time itself were dragging its feet, simply because my mind was already racing miles ahead, mentally flipping through the ironclad legal clauses I had personally drafted years ago for this precise, horrific scenario. I entered my dark, silent apartment and didn't even bother to flip on the overhead lights. Walking straight into the expansive home office where I kept my most highly sensitive, confidential files, I forcefully shoved aside the large, modern abstract oil painting hanging on the north wall. Beneath it lay the hidden, reinforced steel safe that contained the only leverage that truly mattered now. My trembling fingers moved automatically, tracing a familiar pattern over the cold biometric keypad. A sharp green light flashed instantly, unlocking the harsh reality my family had so conveniently chosen to ignore for nearly a decade. I reached deep inside and pulled out the thick, heavy leather binder containing the original property deed and the binding business investment contracts that I hadn't laid eyes on since the day I formally signed them. I carried the dense stack of papers over to my mahogany desk and switched on a single, vintage brass reading lamp, illuminating the precise legal text that was about to systematically dismantle their comfortable, artificial lives. My index finger slowly traced the defining line on the deed, which clearly stated in bold, uncompromising capital letters that the sole, undisputed owner of the magnificent estate located at 7,500 Silver Pine Road was me, Claire Vance. They were currently residing there under a zero-rent lease agreement, a temporary, generous arrangement that explicitly granted me the absolute, unchallengeable right to terminate their residency immediately if they ever violated the strict code of conduct clause. I flipped methodically through the crisp white pages until I located the primary business loan agreement for the luxury wellness spas that Chloe shamelessly paraded around town as her own personal, hard-earned success story. Clause 14. B was brutally explicit regarding the immediate, non-negotiable repayment of the entire principal amount, plus accrued interest, if the primary beneficiary engaged in any conduct deemed detrimental to the primary investor's dignity or professional reputation. Tonight, my little sister had not only verbally insulted me, but she had physically assaulted me, an undeniable act of screaming violence in front of everyone, with dozens of highly credible witnesses who could readily testify to her unhinged behavior. She had blatantly violated every single condition of our carefully structured agreement in a matter of seconds, simply because her temper was significantly faster than her brain. I honestly didn't care for a single second that the sleek digital clock, resting perfectly on my desk, clearly showed it was past 2 a.m., deep into the silent, freezing night. Without the slightest hesitation, I picked up my cell phone and decisively dialed the direct, unlisted number of my most trusted personal attorney, Mr. Sterling. He answered almost instantly on the second ring, displaying the crisp, professional alertness of a man who was paid a massive premium retainer specifically to handle high-stakes corporate crises at absolutely any hour of the day or night. Mr. Sterling, I sincerely need to apologize for calling you this incredibly late, but we absolutely need to execute the primary asset recovery protocol immediately, I stated firmly into the receiver. My voice was completely devoid of any lingering daughterly affection, sounding as bitterly cold and unyielding as the thick layer of ice forming steadily on my penthouse window pane. Is this specifically regarding the contingency plan for the Winter Haven estate and the retail wellness businesses? Mr. Sterling inquired calmly, the distinct rustling of legal papers already audible on his end of the secure line. Yes, and I want absolutely everything executed perfectly by the book, but with maximum unrelenting speed. I want them to wake up to a completely different, devastating reality tomorrow morning, I replied flatly, staring intently at the elegant, looping signature my mother had willingly witnessed on the loan documents a decade ago. Draft the formal eviction notice for the manor, officially giving them exactly 30 days to vacate the premises starting tomorrow. Initiate the immediate, full recall of all outstanding business loans provided to Chloe and securely freeze all operating accounts for a comprehensive forensic audit. I can easily have the official papers served by a certified courier at exactly 8 a.m. tomorrow, right along with the utility cutoff orders you pre-authorized previously, Mr. Sterling confirmed with ruthless efficiency, completely refraining from asking any unnecessary, prying details about the sudden family drama unfolding behind closed doors. Consider it done, Claire. I abruptly ended the call and placed the phone face down on the polished mahogany desk. I slowly turned my heavy leather chair to look out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows at the city lights, twinkling dimly below in the snow, feeling an immense, undeniable sense of absolute finality settling heavily in the center of my chest. There would be absolutely no more second chances, no more tearful apologies, and certainly no more financial bailouts for the people who had treated me like a disposable ATM for years. The storm raging fiercely outside was intensifying, but it was nothing compared to the catastrophic reckoning that was about to hit my family the moment the sun rose. The very next morning, when the pale, anemic winter sunlight had barely begun to touch the massive, frosted floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the Winter Haven Manor, the meticulously orchestrated nightmare I had designed officially commenced for my peacefully sleeping family. The sprawling house was customarily a sanctuary of automated, luxurious warmth and cutting-edge technological comfort that completely shielded them from the brutal, unforgiving Colorado climate. But that profound sense of unearned security was violently, irrevocably ripped away from them in a single, devastating second. Suddenly, the gentle, comforting hum of the advanced geothermal underfloor heating system died out completely, leaving a stark, eerie silence in its wake. The ambient, recessed lighting illuminating the grand hallways flickered twice before plunging into total darkness, and the ultra-high-speed fiber-optic internet connection that constantly connected them to the glamorous outside world was entirely severed straight at the primary source. The multi-million-dollar smart home was instantly, mercilessly transformed from a luxurious, pampered palace into a freezing cold tomb of complete isolation and despair. As the ambient temperature inside the massive rooms began to plummet rapidly, aggressively matching the snowy, desolate landscape outside, the heavy quiet was broken almost immediately by the shrill, demanding voice of my younger sister echoing sharply from the opulent master suite on the second floor, where she usually spent her entire morning endlessly scrolling through social media in her plush king-sized bed. She stomped aggressively onto the grand landing, tightly wrapped in a designer silk robe, while furiously tapping the pristine screen of her latest model smartphone, which was now entirely useless without the high-speed Wi-Fi connection she constantly took for granted. "Mom, why the hell is the Wi-Fi down? I literally can't post anything." Chloe screamed down the sweeping staircase with the petulant, whiny tone of a spoiled teenager rather than a 3-6-year-old woman, completely unaware that her mother was currently frantically pressing useless buttons on the dead, blank thermostat in the main hallway. Susan was far too distracted by the rapidly cooling, biting air to answer her golden child immediately. So, Chloe let out a deeply frustrated huff and aggressively switched her phone to the 5G cellular data network, desperate to complete the impulsive purchase of a stunning $12,000 diamond-encrusted watch she had added to her cart the night before to desperately soothe her wounded, fragile ego. She pressed the place order button with a smug smirk of anticipation, fully expecting the usual, instantaneous dopamine rush of a confirmed luxury purchase. But instead, the bright screen flashed a terrifying, crimson notification that instantly froze the blood solid in her veins. The bold words, "Card declined." Account frozen stared back at her with a brutal, uncompromising finality that she had never, ever experienced in her entire, sheltered life of absolute privilege and dependency. Down in the expansive, freezing living room, my father was aggressively flipping the intricate gold-plated light switches forcefully up and down, as if sheer brute force could magically compel the electricity to return to the dead, useless circuits. He marched heavily toward his shivering wife with a deep scowl etched permanently into his aging, distinguished face, desperately searching for someone to blame for the sudden inconvenience that was rudely interrupting his morning routine. "Susan, did you completely forget to pay the damn bills again? The entire house is freezing like a meat locker," Richard snapped at her with biting, condescending sarcasm, completely failing to realize that this rapidly deteriorating situation was infinitely more serious than a simple, careless administrative oversight or a mistakenly missed utility payment. Before Susan could even begin to defend herself against his harsh, unwarranted accusations, the distinct sound of heavy tires crunching aggressively on the icy gravel driveway immediately drew their panicked attention to the large bay window overlooking the grand front entrance. A sleek, imposing black sedan that looked absolutely nothing like a standard utility repair van had smoothly pulled up to the towering iron gate, and a tall man in a sharp, intimidating charcoal suit stepped out confidently, carrying a thick leather briefcase instead of a common toolbox. Richard hastily straightened his posture and arrogantly adjusted his cashmere sweater, naturally assuming that this must be a senior representative from the local bank or the utility company, arriving to apologize personally and profusely for the unexpected power outage. He walked purposefully and confidently to the heavy, custom oak front door and swung it wide open, fully prepared to demand a groveling explanation and the immediate, unconditional restoration of all premium services for his massive inconvenience. However, the stern-faced man did not offer a polite handshake or a sycophantic apology, but instead reached deeply into his briefcase and handed my father a thick, ominous red envelope, securely sealed with the official, undeniable stamp of the State District Court. The process server clearly stated my father's full legal name to confirm his exact identity, and then abruptly turned around to walk briskly back to his idling vehicle without uttering a single additional word, leaving Richard standing completely dumbfounded in the freezing doorway with the brutal wind howling relentlessly around him. Richard tore open the seal with violently trembling fingers, while Susan and Chloe anxiously gathered right behind him, their breath already forming visible, thick white clouds in the rapidly dropping temperature of the grand foyer. They stared in absolute collective horror at the bold, unforgiving black letters glaring at the very top of the official document, which explicitly read, "Notice of Termination of Tenancy, 30 days to vacate," followed immediately by a devastating secondary asset freezing order issued directly against all business accounts associated with my massive investment. 2 days after the very first devastating sanctions were officially issued against the terrified residents of the Winter Haven Manor, I sat motionless at the absolute head of the long, polished mahogany table in the glass-walled, soundproof conference room of my massive corporate headquarters. The heavy silence hanging in the expansive room was suffocating, despite the constant, vibrant bustle of the sprawling city outside, because I knew exactly, with chilling certainty, what was coming next. I had spent the last 48 exhausting hours deliberately ignoring the hundreds of frantic, desperate missed calls from my terrified parents and sister while I patiently waited for the only crucial piece of information that actually mattered to me now. The large digital atomic clock mounted on the pristine white wall seemed to tick agonizingly slower than usual as I stared blankly at the closed, heavy oak door and mentally prepared myself for the brutal, undeniable forensic reality of my family's profound betrayal. The heavy door finally clicked open, and my closest friend and brilliant chief accountant, Emily, walked in slowly, carrying a massive stack of thick financial binders that looked heavy enough to sink a small yacht. She did not offer me her usual warm, comforting smile or politely ask about my weekend plans, because the grim expression permanently etched on her face was one of pure, unadulterated professional dread violently mixed with deep personal pity. She carefully placed the massive pile of documents directly in front of me with a heavy, ominous thud that echoed sharply in the empty, cold room, and opened the very first folder to a page densely covered in aggressive, neon red highlighter marks. The air in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees instantly as she flipped methodically through the endless pages of complex bank statements that I had foolishly trusted my sister, Chloe, to manage honestly for the past 3 long years. Emily pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at the long rows of highly suspicious, massive transactions that populated the detailed spreadsheet and looked me directly, unflinchingly in the eyes with a grim, sorrowful expression. "Claire, you need to look at this very closely. These aren't just careless business expenses or minor bookkeeping errors. 5-star European resorts, massive illegal gambling sites, private jet charters. She's systematically bleeding the entire company completely dry. I slowly pulled the heavy, damning binder closer to closely inspect the undeniable evidence myself, feeling a cold, sickening knot of pure nausea rapidly forming deep in my stomach. As I finally realized the absolute, staggering magnitude of the massive theft, Chloe had not just been mismanaging the luxury wellness spas through sheer incompetence or extreme laziness. She had been systematically, intentionally siphoning massive funds through a complex, highly illegal web of completely fabricated vendor invoices. I saw recurring, massive payments for non-existent consulting fees that went directly, untraceably into hidden offshore accounts, and massive, suspicious withdrawals for high-end inventory that never actually arrived at the warehouse or ever appeared on the pristine sales floor. The credit card statements painted a truly grotesque, horrifying picture of a deeply selfish woman living a reckless billionaire's lifestyle, while the legitimate business she falsely claimed to run was drowning violently in aggressive red ink and a mountain of unpaid, furious vendor debts. She had shamelessly blown tens of thousands of my hard-earned dollars on exclusive designer handbags and first-class luxury flights to Vegas, all while boldly asking me for even more capital to cover unexpected market downturns during our monthly, agonizing family dinner. I felt like an absolute, gullible fool, forever believing her pathetic, manipulative sob stories about the difficult retail economy when the undeniable reality was printed right here, glaring back at me in stark black and red ink. But the true, soul-crushing horror was patiently waiting for me on the final authorization pages for the massive quarterly budget overruns that I had been far too endlessly busy to scrutinize personally. My tired eyes widened in utter, paralyzing disbelief as I instantly recognized the looping, elegant, undeniable signature boldly scrawled at the very bottom of the massive approval forms, right next to the official, stamped company date. It was the undeniable signature of my own mother, Susan, explicitly authorizing the massive, illegal transfer of vital emergency company reserves directly into Chloe's personal, hidden discretionary fund under the complete, fabricated pretense of urgent, necessary store renovations. My own mother had not only turned a willing blind eye to the massive ongoing theft, but had actively, maliciously facilitated it by abusing her trusted power of attorney to completely override the strict safety checks I had so carefully put in place. She had looked me directly in the face every single week and cheerfully asked how work was going, knowing full well that she was actively helping her favorite, spoiled daughter rob me entirely blind. The profound betrayal cut infinitely deeper than the stinging, humiliating slap at the party, because this was a deeply calculated, long-term, malicious conspiracy to ruthlessly exploit my enduring trust and my vast resources. I violently threw the heavy, expensive fountain pen across the silent room in a sudden, explosive burst of completely uncontrollable rage and stared directly at Emily with eyes that burned intensely with unshed tears of pure, unadulterated fury. So, my own mother knowingly signed off on this massive fraud, I whispered, my voice shaking with rage. She fully knew Chloe was systematically stealing from me and actively helped her hide it. Emily looked down sadly at the polished, gleaming floor before slowly sliding a final, thin black folder across the massive table toward my violently trembling hands to deliver the absolute final, crushing blow. She explained in a very low, deadly serious voice that the comprehensive forensic audit had shockingly revealed massive cash withdrawals occurring at odd, suspicious hours that perfectly matched the brutal repayment schedules of highly dangerous, known underground loan sharks. 3 chaotic days after the damning, horrifying meeting with Emily regarding the undeniable forensic accounting evidence, the suffocating silence from my desperate family finally shattered completely because they had entirely run out of liquid assets and dwindling patience. They foolishly decided that the absolute best course of action was to aggressively storm the sprawling headquarters of my company to loudly demand the immediate restoration of their lavish, unearned lifestyle. The very first warning I received was a frantic, terrified call from the front desk receptionist, informing me that a highly disruptive, chaotic scene was rapidly unfolding in the main, public lobby involving 3 extremely agitated individuals loudly claiming to be my close relatives. I walked purposefully out onto the expansive mezzanine balcony to witness Richard and Susan putting on a pathetic, theatrical performance for the captive benefit of my shocked employees and several waiting, high-profile clients. They were deliberately, aggressively raising their voices to shout wildly about elder abuse and cruel financial abandonment, desperately painting themselves as the innocent, suffering victims of a heartless, monstrous daughter who had callously left them to freeze and starve without just cause. I immediately, coldly instructed the head of building security to forcefully escort them out of the public eye and directly into the soundproof, secure executive conference room, absolutely not to negotiate their demands, but to effectively contain the massive embarrassment they were intentionally causing my firm. They marched arrogantly into the room with a massive, unearned sense of entitlement, fully expecting a private, vulnerable audience where they could easily bully me back into submission. But their arrogant confidence faltered instantly when they saw exactly who was waiting for them. I was seated perfectly still at the head of the polished obsidian table, and to my immediate right sat Mr. Sterling, my ruthlessly efficient attorney, who was actively monitoring a professional-grade audio recorder and a high-definition video camera that was already blinking steadily with a bright red recording light. My parents hesitated nervously near the doorway, but Chloe aggressively pushed past them with a wild, terrified look in her bloodshot eyes that strongly suggested she hadn't slept a single wink since the disastrous night of the party. She looked significantly less like a glamorous fashion mogul and much more like a desperate, cornered animal as she violently slammed her manicured, shaking hand onto the heavy conference table with enough sheer force to crack a polished nail. She did not possess a single shred of the overwhelming arrogance she had proudly displayed at the Christmas gathering, completely replacing it with a frantic, unhinged desperation that absolutely confirmed Emily's terrifying theory about the highly dangerous loan sharks. She leaned aggressively over the massive table, completely invading my personal space, and screamed wildly at me with a voice that cracked horribly under the crushing weight of her sheer terror. "Unfreeze my cards right now, Claire. Do you have absolutely any idea who is aggressively looking for me? I desperately need that money." One agonizing, terrifying week before the strict 30-day eviction notice was officially scheduled to expire, the crushing, unrelenting pressure from the criminal underworld finally, violently pushed Chloe completely past the absolute point of rationality and rapidly turned her into a highly desperate, terrified fugitive. The suffocating atmosphere inside the freezing, silent Winterhaven Manor had dramatically transformed from a tense, resentful family standoff into a literal, horrifying cage of pure, unadulterated fear because my younger sister intimately knew that her borrowed time was rapidly running out infinitely faster than the looming legal clock. While my exhausted parents were entirely consumed with the immense stress of packing their remaining pathetic belongings into cheap cardboard boxes, Chloe was completely paralyzed by a much more immediate, terrifying physical danger that was actively, menacingly lurking just outside the towering estate gates. The absolute, shattering breaking point arrived late in the freezing afternoon when Chloe received a terrifying, final ultimatum directly on her cheap burner phone from the brutal loan shark she had so foolishly borrowed massive sums of money from to desperately fund her secret, crippling gambling addiction. The message was absolutely not a vague, empty threat, but a highly specific, gruesome promise to violently break her legs if she did not somehow come up with $150,000 in accrued interest within the next 24 fleeting hours. She spent the rest of the agonizing evening pacing frantically around her massive, freezing bedroom like a trapped, terrified animal, nervously chewing her expensive fingernails until they bled profusely, knowing with absolute certainty that I had permanently cut off her easy access to the vast company funds she used to constantly rely on. She waited silently in the darkness until the antique grandfather clock in the main hallway chimed exactly 3 times in the early, freezing morning, clearly signaling that sheer exhaustion had finally completely overcome my parents after another long, bitter day of arguing and frantic packing. Chloe crept slowly out of her dark room, dressed entirely in dark, inconspicuous clothing, moving silently and carefully across the massive hardwood floors that creaked ominously in the eerie silence of the completely unheated house. She slowly, carefully pushed open the heavy wooden door to her parents' master bedroom, tightly holding her breath as she listened intently to the steady, rhythmic snoring of the father who had always blindly protected her and the mother who had always endlessly enabled her. She crawled silently on her hands and knees toward the exact side of the bed where she intimately knew my mother kept a small, heavy, fireproof lockbox carefully hidden underneath the ornate frame for dire emergencies. Her cold hands were shaking so violently and uncontrollably that she severely struggled to correctly align the tiny tumblers of the complex combination lock, which she had easily memorized years ago during a previous, minor financial crisis. The heavy lid finally clicked open with a soft, metallic sound, instantly revealing the neat, thick stacks of cash that completely represented my parents' entire, hard-earned retirement fund and the soft velvet pouches containing the priceless family heirloom jewelry. 3 peaceful, incredibly productive months have officially passed since that tumultuous, violent family storm ruthlessly tore through the absolute center of my life, and the chaotic, toxic noise of their endless deceit has finally, permanently been replaced by a serene, orderly, beautiful silence. The thick, brutal winter snow has completely melted away from the quiet streets of Aspen to finally reveal the lush, vibrant promise of a warm spring, perfectly mirroring the profound, permanent transformation that has steadily taken place within my own, newly liberated existence. Now that the deeply ingrained poison has been entirely purged from my daily life, the exhausting legal and deeply personal battles are officially, legally over, leaving behind a vastly improved, new reality where malicious actions have immediate, tangible consequences, and cruel, bad behavior is no longer blindly rewarded with cowardly silence or endless amounts of my hard-earned money. The final, pathetic chapter of Chloe's tragic story officially concluded not in a sunny, 5-star luxury resort, but in the freezing, sterile interrogation room of a rural police station located dangerously near the Canadian border, where her desperate, terrified run from the law came to an abrupt, humiliating end. My younger sister was swiftly apprehended by federal agents, while foolishly attempting to boldly use a crudely forged, fake passport to illegally cross into British Columbia in a highly desperate, frantic bid to escape the violent loan sharks and the state police simultaneously. She is currently being securely held completely without bail in the stark, terrifying federal detention center while actively facing a massive litany of highly serious, undeniable felony charges ranging from massive grand larceny and corporate embezzlement to aggravated identity theft and complex wire fraud. The arrogant, spoiled socialite who once genuinely believed she was entirely above the common rules of society is now realistically facing a terrifying, potential sentence of 10 to 15 long years in a harsh federal prison where her fake, manipulative tears will hold absolutely zero value. My completely shattered parents have also been brutally forced to fully confront a harsh, unforgiving reality that is incredibly far removed from the exclusive, wealthy country clubs and glamorous, high-society gala dinners they used to arrogantly frequent during the long years they shamelessly lived entirely off my endless generosity. Richard and Susan are currently unhappily residing in a tiny, cramped one-bedroom subsidized apartment located deep in a very run-down, noisy industrial district on the dangerous outskirts of Denver, officially registered as functionally homeless before the state intervened. Reports from their formerly assigned, overworked social worker clearly indicate that their long, empty days are entirely spent in a toxic, endless cycle of very bitter, loud arguments where they endlessly, pointlessly blame each other for entirely failing to effectively control Chloe or for simply not manipulating me effectively enough to keep the money flowing. They have completely, permanently lost the only 2 superficial things they ever truly valued most in the entire world, their fake social status and their precious, criminal golden child, and are now left with absolutely nothing but the devastating, undeniable knowledge that they are the sole, direct architects of their own profound misery. As for me, I firmly decided that I absolutely could not ever return to live in the massive Winter Haven manor because the very walls were far too deeply saturated with painful, toxic memories of endless disrespect and profound ungratefulness. I successfully sold the sprawling property for a very massive, unexpected profit to a young tech billionaire from Silicon Valley and immediately used the entire, massive sum to greatly expand my charitable foundation, which is entirely dedicated to funding ambitious, female entrepreneurs. I have truly found a profound, beautiful sense of pure purpose in actively helping smart, driven women who actually possess the genuine drive and strong integrity to successfully build their own incredible success rather than lazily stealing it from others. My life is now completely filled with genuine, warm laughter and deep, lasting peace, happily shared with true, loyal friends like Emily, who bravely stood firmly by me when I had absolutely nothing to offer her but the harsh, painful truth. This incredibly painful story serves as a brutal but absolutely necessary, stark reminder to absolutely everyone watching that simply sharing basic DNA with someone does not magically grant them a permanent, unquestionable license to endlessly abuse your kindness or systematically destroy your precious mental health. We are very often falsely taught that family is absolutely everything, and that we must silently endure any massive amount of cruel mistreatment simply for the sake of keeping a fake, toxic peace. But that is a highly dangerous, manipulative lie that only keeps vulnerable victims permanently trapped in a cycle of abuse. True, lasting loyalty must be actively, consistently earned through deep mutual respect and genuine reciprocal care. And it is absolutely never your obligation to set yourself completely on fire just to keep other selfish people warm. The absolute most courageous, difficult thing you can ever possibly do is to bravely pick up the sharp scissors and decisively cut the heavy cord that tightly tethers you to toxic people who constantly drain your bright spirit. Even if those very people are the exact ones who originally gave you life, you deeply deserve to be safely surrounded by those who genuinely celebrate your beautiful existence, not those who only ever value you for exactly what you can financially provide for them. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my long story and for bravely walking this incredibly difficult, painful path toward genuine justice and deep self-respect alongside me until the very end. I am very curious to know exactly what you truly think about my final, difficult decision to legally prosecute my own sister and completely permanently cut off my toxic parents. Do you honestly think I was far too harsh, or would you have done exactly the same thing if you were standing in my shoes? Please share your honest thoughts and any similar, painful experiences in the comment section below. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel, Karma's Coils, for more incredible stories about strong resilience and the ultimate power of karma.